The world had shrunk to the size of my front window. From this dusty perch, I watched the seasons bleed into one another, marked not by the turning of leaves, but by the subtle changes in the mail carrier's uniform. In summer, the crisp, short sleeves of his blue shirt revealed forearms dusted with fine, sun-bleached hair. In winter, the darker, heavier jacket added a bulk to his shoulders that seemed both protective and immense. He was a constant, a fixed point in the spinning, lonely orbit of my life. His name, according to a stray piece of junk mail addressed to postal customer, but with his name scribbled on a sticky note by a previous tenant, was Elias. I was a graphic designer, a profession that sounds more glamorous than it is. In reality, it meant I spent 10 hours a day in a silent house, bathed in the blue glow of a monitor, moving pixels around for clients who used words like synergy and pop. The isolation had crept up on me. At first, it was a comfort, a quiet haven from the noise of a world I never quite felt in sync with. But years of it had turned the quiet into a crushing silence, the solitude into a profound loneliness. My human interactions were transactional and brief. The cashier at the grocery store, the delivery guy with my takeout, and Elias. Our exchanges were laughably short. A nod, a brief murmur of thanks, the soft thud of a package on the porch. Yet, in the vast emptiness of my days, these 30-second encounters became events. I would find my focus drifting from my screen around 3 o'clock, my ears straining for the familiar, low rumble of his truck turning onto my street. It was a pathetic ritual, one I was deeply ashamed of, but it was also the only thing I had to look forward to. He had a way of moving that was utterly devoid of wasted motion. Efficient, steady, grounded. He walked with a purpose that I, a man who could spend an entire day drifting from room to room, deeply envied. He never seemed rushed, yet he was always precise. The way he sorted the letters with a flick of his thumb, the clean, decisive way he slid the metal door of the truck open and shut. I cataloged these details like a naturalist studying a rare bird. The sharp line of his jaw, often tight with concentration. The way his dark hair curled just slightly at the nape of his neck when it got humid. The surprising gentleness in his hands, hands that looked strong enough to change a tire but handled flimsy envelopes with a delicate care. My crush on him was a quiet, secret thing, nurtured in the silence of my house. It was a low hum beneath the surface of my days, a flicker of warmth in the cold expanse of my life. It was safe. He was the mail carrier. I was the guy on his route. The boundaries were clear, immutable. He delivered the mail, and I received it. There was no room for complication, no risk of rejection. He existed for me in this perfect, untouchable state, a handsome stranger I could project all my foolish, romantic notions onto without ever having to face the messy reality of another human being. He was a fantasy woven into the fabric of my routine. The inciting incident, the tiny tremor that would eventually shake the foundations of my carefully constructed solitude, was not a dramatic event. It was a package, a large, flat box containing a new drawing tablet, something I had ordered weeks ago and forgotten about. It was too big for the mailbox. Ordinarily, a carrier might have just left it on the porch, but Elias walked it to the door. I heard the crunch of his boots on the gravel path, and my heart, that traitorous organ, gave a stupid little lurch. I opened the door before he could knock, a feat of timing that I hoped came across as coincidental and not pathetic. He stood there, holding the box with both hands. He was closer than he'd ever been. I could smell the faint, clean scent of the outdoors on him, a mix of sunshine and dry leaves. "For Julian Croft," he said. His voice was lower than I'd imagined, a calm baritone that seemed to settle in the air between us. It was the first time he'd ever said my full name. "That's me." I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. He held the box out. "It's a bit awkward. Where do you want it?" "Oh, just here is fine." I took it from him, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. A spark, a tiny jolt of electricity, shot up my arm. It was nothing. It was static electricity. It was the friction of cardboard against skin. It was everything. My mind raced to find a rational explanation, anything to dismiss the sudden, dizzying warmth that flooded my chest. He gave a slight nod, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. They were a deep, steady brown, and in that fleeting second, I felt an unnerving sense of being seen. Not just perceived as the resident of 114 Willow Creek Lane, but actually seen. His gaze wasn't invasive or probing. It was just present. And then it was gone. He turned and walked back to his truck, his stride just as steady and purposeful as ever. I closed the door and leaned against it, the heavy box clutched to my chest like a shield. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had spoken to him. We had touched. It was the most pathetic milestone in the history of human romance. But for me, it felt like a seismic shift. The fantasy had brushed up against reality, and the contact had left me reeling. That night, I couldn't focus on my work. The memory of that brief touch, the sound of my name in his low voice, played on a loop in my head. The quiet of my house no longer felt like a comfort. It felt like an echo chamber, amplifying the beat of my own lonely heart. The world outside my window had just gotten a little bit bigger and a whole lot more terrifying. The days that followed fell into a new, excruciating pattern. The anticipation that once started at 3 o'clock now began the moment I woke up. Every package delivery became a source of both hope and dread. I started ordering things I didn't need, books, art supplies, obscure kitchen gadgets, just for the chance that they would be too large for the mailbox. It was a transparently sad strategy, but I was in too deep to care. Sometimes it worked. He would bring a box to the door, and we would replay our 30-second scene. Package for Julian Croft, thanks a nod. The brush of our fingers. Each time, I searched his face for some sign, some flicker of recognition that these moments meant something to him, too. But his expression was always professionally pleasant, his eyes steady and unreadable. He was the stoic protector of the U.S. Postal Service, and I was just another stop on his route. I began to watch him more intently, my observation taking on a forensic quality. I learned the precise way he angled his truck when he parked, the slight lean to his left as he reached across the passenger seat to grab the mail for my block. I noticed a small, faded scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that made his face infinitely more interesting. I saw the way his shoulders would relax, just a fraction, after he finished the last delivery on our street, a silent signal that his long day was nearing its end. My internal monologue became a constant stream of analysis. When he handed me a package and his fingers lingered for a millisecond longer than necessary, I would spend the next 4 hours dissecting the moment. Was that intentional? Did he feel it too? Or is he just a tactile person? Maybe his hands were cold. Stop it, Julian. You're insane. It was exhausting, this endless cycle of hope and self-recrimination. I was living more inside my head than I was in the real world, crafting entire conversations and scenarios that would never happen. One Tuesday, a delivery of heavy stock paper coincided with a sudden downpour. The sky had been a placid blue just moments before, but it tore open without warning. I saw his truck pull up through the sheets of rain. He got out, pulling the hood of his rain jacket up, the heavy box balanced on his hip. He was halfway up my path when the bottom of the cardboard box, weakened by the deluge, gave way. I didn't even think. I threw open the door and ran out into the rain, my socks instantly soaked as I hit the flagstone path. "I'll help," I yelled over the drumming of the water. He was trying to scoop up the reams of paper, which were already starting to warp and darken at the edges. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's my responsibility." "Don't be ridiculous. It's just paper," I said, gathering a teetering stack in my arms. "Let's just get it inside." We worked in a frantic, unspoken rhythm, shuttling the soggy paper onto my porch. We were both soaked through in seconds. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead and ran in rivulets down his face. In the chaos, the professional boundary between us dissolved. We were just two men trying to salvage a box of paper from a storm. When the last of it was safe on the covered porch, we stood there, dripping and breathing heavily. I was suddenly aware of how close we were, the small space crowded with our presence. I could see the individual drops of water clinging to his eyelashes. He pushed his wet hair back from his forehead, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his entire face, softening the stern lines and making him look younger, more approachable. "Well," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice. That was something. I laughed too, a real, unforced sound. "Yeah, sorry about your box. Sorry about your paper," he countered. He looked at me, his brown eyes holding mine, and for the first time, the gaze wasn't unreadable. It was warm. Amused. "You're always here," he said, his tone shifting from professional to conversational. "You work from home." My heart did a little flip. "A personal question." We were having a conversation. "Yeah, I'm a graphic designer." I gestured vaguely toward the inside of my house, suddenly self-conscious of the clutter I knew was visible from the doorway. He nodded, his eyes flicking past me into the house. They landed on a large abstract canvas I had propped against the wall, a swirl of blues and grays I'd been working on to blow off steam. "Is that yours?" "The mess?" "Yes." "The painting?" "Also yes." His smile widened. "I like it. The painting, I mean. The mess is okay too." He lingered for a moment longer, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the porch roof. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and ozone. It felt like a bubble in time, a quiet space carved out of the storm. Then, as if remembering himself, he took a small step back. "Well, I should get back to it. Got to finish the route." "Of course. Thanks for trying to save the paper." "Thanks for the help," he said. He gave me one last look, a look that felt different, more significant, before turning and jogging back through the rain to his truck. I stood on the porch for a long time after he drove away, drenched and shivering, but feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had smiled at me. He had asked about my work. He had noticed my painting. These were small things, tiny crumbs of connection, but to a man who had been starving for years, it felt like a feast. The line between my fantasy and my reality was blurring, and for the first time, I wasn't entirely terrified by the prospect. I was starting to feel a dangerous, unfamiliar flicker of hope. And hope, I was learning, was a far more complicated thing to live with than loneliness. The rainstorm became a new benchmark in our interactions, a before and after. The change was subtle, but it was there. His nods were now accompanied by a small, almost imperceptible smile. The brief thanks was sometimes followed by a "have a good one." He started to bring packages to the door even when they probably could have been squeezed into the mailbox. Each time, my heart would leap into my throat, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. He never mentioned the rain again, but it hung in the air between us, a shared memory. I found myself becoming bolder in my own quiet way. One afternoon, as he handed me a small parcel, I found the courage to speak first. "Busy day?" I asked, my voice betraying a slight tremor. He seemed surprised for a second, then his features softened. "Always, this time of year. Everyone's ordering gardening supplies." He gestured with his head toward my neglected flower beds, which were a riot of weeds. "Looks like you might be next." It was a tease. A gentle, friendly tease. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "I have a black thumb. I kill plastic plants." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. I don't believe that. His gaze drifted back to the doorway, to where my painting was still propped up. "Anyone who can do that," he said, nodding toward the canvas, "can figure out a hydrangea." And then he was gone, leaving me on the doorstep with a racing pulse and a stupidly wide grin on my face. He had remembered the painting. He had remembered our conversation. I wasn't just a faceless address to him. I was Julian, the guy with the messy house and the blue painting and the black thumb. This small accumulation of personal details felt like a treasure, a secret map I was slowly piecing together. The internal analysis kicked into overdrive. I replayed his words, his tone, his smile. He was just being friendly, the cautious part of my brain insisted. It's his job to be pleasant. But the hopeful, yearning part, the part that had been dormant for so long, whispered back, "No, it was more than that. He lingered. He teased you. He remembered." This internal debate was a constant companion. It was the background noise to my work, the silent guest at my dinner table. I was living a double life, the competent, professional graphic designer on the surface and the obsessive, lovesick teenager underneath. The touches, too, began to change. They were still brief, still plausibly accidental, but they felt charged with a new significance. A hand brushing my arm as he pointed to the signature line on his scanner, his knuckles grazing mine as I took a stack of letters. Each time, my skin would tingle where he'd touched me, the sensation lingering long after he was gone. One particularly hot afternoon, he brought a heavy box of books to the door. He was sweating, a sheen of moisture on his forehead. The collar of his uniform darkened with it. "This one's a beast," he said, shifting its weight. "Here, let me get it." I said, reaching for the box. As I took it, my hand covered his for a moment. His skin was warm, slightly damp. It was a solid, grounding warmth. I could feel the strength in his hand, the slight calluses on his palm. It was the most intimate contact we had ever shared. I looked up and found his eyes on me, his expression unreadable again, but intense. The air grew thick and heavy, the chirping of crickets suddenly deafeningly loud. My breath hitched in my chest. I felt like he could see right through me, could see the frantic, desperate hope I was trying so hard to conceal. I am breaking. I am standing on my porch, holding a box of books, and I am about to shatter into a million pieces. His hand is still under mine. He hasn't pulled away. My thumb moves, just a fraction of an inch, stroking the back of his hand. It's an unconscious, instinctive gesture, a desperate reach for connection. His eyes widen, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something crosses his face. Surprise? Confusion? I can't tell. He gently slides his hand out from under mine. The loss of contact is sudden, shocking cold. There you go, he says, his voice a little rougher than usual. He clears his throat. Have a good day, Julian. He turns and walks away without another word, his back ramrod straight. I stumbled inside and set the box down, my hands trembling. I had done it. I had crossed a line. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by my own clumsy, overt gesture. I had scared him off. The fragile, beautiful thing we were building, or that I imagined we were building, I had smashed it with my neediness. The rest of the day was a blur of self-loathing. I paced the house, my mind a maelstrom of regret. I was an idiot, a creep, the weird, lonely guy on his route who couldn't handle a simple, friendly interaction. I was convinced he would ask to be reassigned. I would never see him again. Or worse, he would continue to deliver the mail, but with a new, professional coldness, the warmth gone forever, a constant reminder of my foolishness. The next day, I dreaded 3 o'clock. I hid from the window, unable to bear the thought of seeing him. I heard the truck pull up, the familiar sound now a source of pure anxiety. I heard the metallic click of the mailbox opening and closing. He hadn't come to the door. I felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it was almost a physical pain, immediately followed by a wave of relief. It was better this way. We would go back to the way things were. The fantasy was safer. But then I heard footsteps on the gravel path. My blood ran cold. He was coming to the door. He was going to confront me, to tell me to back off. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, my heart pounding in my ears. The knock came, firm and steady. I took a deep breath and opened the door, bracing myself for the worst. He was standing there, holding a single, small envelope. It was clearly not a package. This one looked important, he said, his voice quiet. Didn't want to bend it. It was a flimsy excuse. The envelope could have easily fit in the mailbox. I took it from him, my fingers numb. Thank you, I whispered, not daring to meet his eyes. Julian. I looked up. He was watching me, his expression serious. There was no anger, no disgust, just a quiet intensity. Are you okay? He asked. The question undid me. It was so simple, so direct, so full of a concern I hadn't expected. I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. I'm sorry about yesterday, I stammered. I don't know what I was thinking. I crossed a line. It won't happen again. He was silent for a long moment, just looking at me. I could feel his gaze on my face, a tangible weight. What if I didn't want you to think it was a line? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. The world stopped. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind stopped blowing. My heart stopped beating. I stared at him, trying to process his words. What if I didn't want you to think it was a line? It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a confession. It was a question, an offering. He was giving me a chance to take it back, to retreat to safety. But he was also opening a door, just a crack, to show me the possibility of something more. It was a moment of profound, terrifying vulnerability, not just for me, but for him too. He was the mail carrier. He was risking his professional decorum, his job, maybe, by standing on my porch and saying this. I found my voice, but it was shaky, fragile. Oh, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yeah. Oh, he held my gaze for another second, a universe of unspoken things passing between us. Then he nodded, a short, sharp gesture of confirmation. I'll see you tomorrow, he said, and turned to leave. I watched him walk away, but this time, it felt different. The distance between us wasn't an unbridgeable chasm anymore. It was just space, space that could be crossed. He had seen my clumsy, desperate reach for what it was, and he hadn't recoiled. He had reached back. The hope that had been a dangerous flicker was now a steady flame, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of getting burned. The days that followed were charged with a new kind of tension. It was no longer the anxious, one-sided pining of my own making. It was a shared current that flowed between us. The subtext was now the text. Our brief conversations at the door were freighted with unspoken meaning. A simple "how are you?" felt like an intimate inquiry. A shared look held volumes. We were orbiting each other, caught in a gravitational pull that was growing stronger each day. I lived for those few minutes around 3:15. The rest of my day was just a prelude. I found myself taking more care with my appearance, running a comb through my hair, changing out of the paint-splattered t-shirt I usually worked in. It was a foolish, adolescent ritual, but it made me feel like I was an active participant in this strange, silent courtship, not just a passive observer. He found more and more reasons to come to the door. A magazine that might get creased. A bundle of letters held together by a rubber band. One day he brought a single postcard. "This looked fragile," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. I took the postcard, my lips twitching into a smile. "Extremely. Thank you for your diligence." "Just doing my job," he said, but his smile told me he knew exactly what he was doing. We were playing a game, a delicate dance of plausible deniability. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Every interaction felt like a step onto a tightrope, the exhilarating risk of falling balanced by the incredible view. The tipping point came in the form of a certified letter. It arrived on a Friday, a thick, official-looking envelope that required a signature. My heart hammered against my ribs when I saw it in his hand. This was different. This required a longer interaction, a clipboard, a pen, a mandated period of proximity. He held out the electronic scanner. "Need a signature for this one." I took the stylus, my hand shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop it. My nervousness was a palpable thing, a frantic energy buzzing around me. I tried to sign my name, but my signature came out as a jagged, unreadable scrawl. "Sorry," I mumbled, my face burning with embarrassment. "My hand's a little shaky." "It's okay," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "Take your time." He moved closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and placed his hand on the scanner to steady it. His thumb rested against my knuckles. His warmth seeped into my skin, a steadying presence. He smelled of laundry soap and the clean, metallic scent of rain in the air from a passing shower. I am standing on my porch. Elias is next to me, his body a warm, solid line against mine. His thumb is stroking the back of my hand, a slow, deliberate movement. This is not an accident. This is not my imagination. This is real. I lift my head and look at him. He's not looking at the scanner. He's looking at me. His brown eyes are dark, intense, and finally, completely readable. They are full of the same yearning, the same quiet desperation that I feel in my own chest. The world narrows to the space between our faces. I can see the tiny flecks of gold in his irises. I can feel his breath on my cheek. The stylus falls from my fingers, clattering softly on the porch floor. Neither of us moves. The air is thick, charged, vibrating with everything we haven't said for months. "Julian," he breathes, my name a prayer on his lips. He is going to kiss me. I know it. I can see the decision in his eyes. My own eyes flutter, shut in anticipation. I lean in, rising on my toes just slightly, closing the last inch of distance between us. The sound of a car door slamming down the street shatters the moment. My eyes fly open. Elias pulls back instantly, a flush creeping up his neck. He looks flustered, caught. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, is getting out of her car, her arms full of groceries. She gives us a cheerful, oblivious wave. "Afternoon, Elias," she calls out. Elias forces a smile, his professional mask snapping back into place. "Afternoon. Carol," he turns back to me, his expression shuttered once more. He picks up the stylus from the floor and hands it to me, his fingers carefully avoiding mine. "Just sign there," he says, his voice clipped, all business. I scribble something on the line, my hands numb. He takes the scanner back, taps the screen a few times, and hands me the letter. "Have a good weekend," he says, his tone formal, distant. He turns and walks away before I can even form a reply. I stood there, the letter clutched in my hand, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. We had been so close. The air had been electric with possibility. And now it was gone, snuffed out by the slam of a car door. The fragile connection we had built felt like it had been severed. He had retreated, pulling back behind the safety of his uniform. The weekend stretched before me, a vast, empty expanse of silence and regret. The tightrope had snapped, and I was falling. The weekend was a special kind of hell. I replayed the moment on the porch 1,000 times, each viewing more painful than the last. The look in his eyes, the feel of his breath, the promise of a kiss that never came. It was a ghost limb, an ache for something I had almost had. I tormented myself with questions. Was he embarrassed? Did he regret it? Was he angry at me for leaning in, for being so transparent with my desire? By Monday morning, I had convinced myself that it was over. He would go back to being just the mail carrier. He would leave everything in the mailbox, avoid my gaze, and the silent, beautiful language we had developed would be forgotten. The thought was unbearable. The loneliness I had once found comforting now felt like a cage. I had tasted the possibility of connection, and the thought of returning to my old life of quiet isolation was devastating. I spent the day in a state of suspended dread. I couldn't work. I couldn't eat. I just sat by the window, watching the clock, waiting for the verdict. When I heard his truck turn onto my street, my stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I couldn't bring myself to go to the door. I stayed at my window, hidden behind the curtain like a coward, and watched. He got out of the truck, his movements as steady and efficient as ever. He walked to my mailbox, his face a neutral mask. He put the mail in, closed the little metal door, and turned to walk back to his truck. He didn't even glance at the house. That was it. The confirmation. A cold, bleak certainty settled over me. It was over. I had imagined it all. He was just being friendly, and I, in my desperate loneliness, had blown it up into a grand romance. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread through my entire body. I watched him get back into his truck. He sat there for a moment, not starting the engine. He was looking at his hands, which were resting on the steering wheel. His route was finished. My house was his last stop. I knew this from my months of observation. He should have been driving away, heading back to the post office. But he just sat there. And then, I saw him do something I had never seen him do before. He dropped his head forward, resting his forehead on the steering wheel, and let out a long, slow breath. It was a gesture of utter exhaustion, of frustration, of defeat. And in that moment, I understood. He wasn't retreating because he was disgusted or angry. He was retreating because he was just as scared as I was. Something inside me shifted. The fear that had held me captive for so long was replaced by a sudden, fierce clarity. I had spent months watching, waiting, analyzing, living inside my own head. I had been a passive observer of my own life, waiting for someone else to make the first move, to take the risk. But love isn't a spectator sport. You can't win if you don't play. I am moving. I am not thinking. I am just doing. My feet carry me out the front door, down the porch steps, across the lawn. The grass is cool and damp under my bare feet. The late afternoon sun is warm on my face. The world feels sharp and real, not muted and distant like it usually does. I reach his truck just as he's lifting his head from the steering wheel. He sees me through the windshield, and his eyes go wide with surprise. He rolls down the window, his expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Julian? Is everything okay? I don't answer. I don't trust my voice. I walk around to the driver's side door. He watches my every move, his face a question mark. I stop in front of him, my heart pounding a frantic, powerful rhythm against my ribs. This is it. The breaking point. The moment where everything changes, for better or for worse. I raise my hand, slowly, deliberately. I press my palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. The fabric of his uniform is rough under my fingertips, but beneath it, I can feel the steady, solid beat of his heart. It's beating just as fast as mine. I look him straight in the eye, and I pour every ounce of the hope and fear and yearning I have felt for the past year into my gaze. My voice, when it comes, is not the thin, reedy thing I expected. It is clear, and it is steady. Sign here, I say. He stares at me, his lips parted slightly. The silence stretches, thick and heavy. I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. I feel the frantic thump of his heart under my palm. For a terrifying second, I think I have made a catastrophic mistake. His face is unreadable, a blank canvas of shock. Then, slowly, so slowly, his expression changes. The shock melts away, replaced by a wave of understanding, of relief, of something so tender it makes my own heart ache. A slow smile spreads across his face, a real, genuine smile that reaches his eyes and makes them shine. He doesn't say anything. Instead, he lifts his own hand and covers mine, his fingers lacing through my own. His hand is warm and strong, and it completely envelopes mine, holding it tight against his chest. He squeezes my hand, a silent, definitive answer. He leans forward, closing the small space between us. His forehead comes to rest against mine. I close my eyes, overwhelmed by the feeling of his skin against mine, the solid pressure of his hand, the shared, frantic rhythm of our hearts. "Okay," he whispers, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll sign." And then he kisses me. It's not a frantic, desperate kiss. It's slow, and it's deep, and it's sure. It's a kiss that tastes of relief and recognition, of coming home. It's the period at the end of a sentence I've been waiting my whole life to read. In the quiet of my sleepy suburban street, with the engine of the mail truck still warm, everything in my lonely, silent world finally, irrevocably, changed. The fantasy was dead. Long live the reality. The next morning, I woke up to a world that was both exactly the same and entirely different. The sun still streamed through my window at the same angle. The birds still chirped their chaotic morning symphony. But the silence in my house was no longer a heavy, oppressive blanket. It was a peaceful quiet, humming with the memory of the day before. I was also a complete and utter wreck. The clarity and courage I had felt standing by his truck had evaporated with the morning dew, replaced by a tidal wave of anxiety. What now? What were we? Was that a one-time, heat-of-the-moment thing? Or was it the beginning of something? I had no idea how to navigate this new territory. My life was built on predictable routines and safe distances. The kiss had shattered all of that. I spent the morning pacing, replaying our kiss, his smile, the feeling of his hand over mine. I tried to work, but the pixels on my screen swam before my eyes. My focus was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made it impossible to sit still. The primary source of my anxiety was, as always, 3:15. How would he act today? Would he be warm and open, the man who had kissed me with such tenderness? Or would he be the professional, stoic mail carrier, retreating back into the safety of his role? The uncertainty was excruciating. As the hour approached, I felt sick with nerves. I considered hiding again, but I knew I couldn't. I had to face this, whatever it was. I stood by the door, my hands clammy, my heart doing a nervous tap dance against my ribs. I heard the truck. I heard the familiar crunch of his boots on the gravel. I braced myself. He came to the door, a small stack of letters in his hand. He looked nervous. His eyes didn't quite meet mine, and there was a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there the day before. My heart sank. He regretted it. "Mail?" he said, his voice quiet, almost formal. He held the letters out to me. I took them, our fingers brushing. The familiar spark was there, but the moment was fraught with a new, awkward tension. "Thanks," I mumbled, my gaze fixed on the floor. This was it. The retreat. We were strangers again. I started to close the door, a wave of disappointment washing over me, when he spoke again. "Wait." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I looked up at him. He was finally meeting my eyes, and his were filled with a raw vulnerability that mirrored my own. "I woke up this morning," he started, then stopped, clearing his throat. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words. "I woke up, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel heavy." He looked down at his own hands, then back at me. "I just wanted you to know that." It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of 1,000 love poems. He wasn't retreating. He was just as scared and uncertain as I was. He was reassuring me, telling me that what had happened between us was real, and that it was good. A wobbly smile broke out on my face. "Me too," I said, my voice thick with relief. "I feel light." His own smile answered mine, small but genuine. The awkward tension between us dissipated, replaced by a quiet, shared understanding. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze warm and steady. Then, with a small nod, he turned and walked back to his truck. I closed the door and leaned against it, a giddy, joyful laugh bubbling up from my chest. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. The fear that had been my constant companion for so long was still there, a faint whisper in the back of my mind, but its voice was weaker now. It was being drowned out by a new, more powerful feeling, a profound, terrifying, and absolutely wonderful sense of hope. The next few days were a study in tentative discovery. We fell into a new routine, one built around our brief, daily encounters. He would always bring the mail to the door, and we would talk for a few minutes. The conversations were simple, surface-level things, the weather, our weekends, my latest painting. But underneath, there was a current of intimacy, a silent acknowledgement of the deeper connection we now shared. He told me small things about himself. He liked to fish. He was helping his sister renovate her kitchen. He had a dog, a goofy golden retriever named Gus. I, in turn, told him about my work, my passion for art, my struggle to keep my houseplants alive. Each new detail was a gift, a piece of a puzzle we were slowly assembling together. The touches became more deliberate, less ambiguous. His hand would linger on my arm when he passed me a package. He would gently brush a stray piece of lint from my shoulder. One day, as I was signing for another package, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers warm against my skin. The gesture was so simple, so tender, it made my breath catch in my throat. But our connection existed only in this strange, liminal space on my front porch for 5 minutes a day. The world of his life, his friends, his family, his home, and the world of mine, my quiet, solitary existence, remained separate. The internal test began. My old fears started to creep back in. Was this sustainable? Could something real be built on these stolen moments? Or was this just a porch romance, a fleeting connection that would never survive in the real world? My self-doubt whispered that I was too quiet, too awkward, too broken for someone as steady and grounded as Elias. He would eventually see the lonely, anxious man behind the door and realize he'd made a mistake. I was spiraling, caught in the undertow of my own insecurities. I started to pull back, just slightly. I kept our conversations shorter. I avoided his touch. I didn't meet his eyes for as long. I was preemptively protecting myself from the rejection I was sure was coming. Elias noticed immediately. He was far too perceptive not to. The light in his eyes dimmed a little each day. The easy warmth between us was replaced by a hesitant confusion. I knew I was hurting him and hurting myself, but I didn't know how to stop. On Friday, exactly 1 week after our kiss, he came to the door with my mail. I gave him a weak, watery smile and took the letters, preparing for a quick retreat. "Are we going to talk about it?" he asked, his voice low and serious. He wasn't going to let me run away. "Talk about what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "About why you've spent the last 3 days acting like I'm a stranger you're trying to avoid." His gaze was direct, unwavering. There was no anger in it, only a deep, searching concern. I deflated, all my pretense falling away. I looked down at the gravel path, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm just scared," I admitted, the words barely a whisper. "Scared of what?" he asked gently. "Of this. Of you. Of me." I finally looked up at him, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "I'm not good at this, Elias. I'm good at being alone. I don't know how to be part of a we." He listened patiently, his expression softening with understanding. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "Do I look scared?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, at his steady brown eyes, at the determined set of his mouth, at the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. No, he didn't look scared. He looked sure. "You're the bravest person I know, Julian," he said softly. "You stood in front of my truck and laid your heart on the line. Don't tell me you don't know how to do this. You're the one who taught me." His words were a balm on my frayed nerves. He saw strength where I only saw weakness. He saw courage where I only saw desperation. He saw me. He dropped his hand from my face but captured my hand in his fingers lacing firmly with mine. "My shift ends in an hour," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm going to go home, shower, change out of this ridiculous uniform, and park my actual car down the street. And then I'm going to walk up to this door, and I'm going to ask the man who lives here if he wants to get some dinner with me. Like a real date. No mail involved. A tear I hadn't realized I was holding back slipped down my cheek. I laughed, a wet, hiccuping sound. And what if he says no? Elias's lips curved into a slow, confident smile. He won't. He gave my hand one last squeeze, and then let go. I'll see you in an hour, he said, and walked away, his stride full of the purpose and certainty I had admired from my window for so long. But this time, I knew he was walking toward me, not away. The test was over. I had failed it, but he had refused to let me. He was making a conscious choice, a deliberate move to pull our fragile, porch-bound connection into the light of the real world. And I, for the first time, was ready to step out of the shadows and meet him there. An hour later, true to his word, a scuffed but clean blue pickup truck parked down the street. I watched from the window as Elias got out. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his chest and shoulders. He looked different without the uniform, more relaxed, more himself. He looked incredible. My heart did a familiar, frantic flutter, but this time it was pure, unadulterated excitement, with no trace of fear. He walked up the path and knocked on the door, a small, shy smile on his face. I opened it, my own grin feeling wide and goofy. "Hi," he said, his voice softer without the ambient noise of the street. "Hi," I replied. We stood there for a moment, just beaming at each other like idiots. "So," he said, rocking back on his heels. "I know this guy who lives here. He's a little quiet, kind of a mess, but he has this amazing smile. I was wondering if he might be free for dinner." My heart swelled. I think he can probably clear his schedule. The evening was simple, and it was perfect. We went to a small, quiet Italian restaurant downtown. We talked for hours. I learned that the scar on his eyebrow was from a childhood fall out of a treehouse. He learned that I had moved to this quiet town after a bad breakup in the city years ago, seeking solitude. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as easily as if we had known each other for years. In a way, we had. We had spent a year learning the shape of each other from a distance, and now we were just filling in the details. When he dropped me off, he walked me to the door. The porch, once the entire stage for our relationship, now felt like just one small part of it. "I had a really good time tonight, Julian," he said, his hands in his pockets. "Me too." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his chest. I could feel the steady thrum of his heart beneath my ear. He was real. This was real. His arms came around me, holding me tight. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other in the quiet of the night. It felt more intimate, more profound than any kiss. The story doesn't end there, of course. It began. The days that followed were filled with quiet, domestic intimacies. He came over after his shift, and we cooked dinner together in my cluttered kitchen. He didn't seem to mind the mess. He helped me finally tackle the weeds in my garden, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he showed me how to prune the rose bushes. We spent a Saturday afternoon just sitting on my porch, reading in comfortable silence, his leg pressed against mine. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie. I was curled up against his side, my head on his shoulder. His arm was draped around me, his fingers idly tracing patterns on my arm. The house was quiet, the only sound the low murmur of the television. I had spent so many nights in this exact spot, feeling the crushing weight of my own loneliness. But now, the silence was a shared comfort, the space filled with his warm, steady presence. I looked around the room, at the familiar objects, the canvases leaning against the wall, the dusty window I had spent so many hours looking through. For so long, this house had been my sanctuary and my prison, a place I hid from the world. But it wasn't just my house anymore. It was becoming our space. He was here. He was real, and solid, and warm beside me. I thought back to the man I was a year ago, the lonely observer watching the world from a distance, convinced he was destined to be alone. I thought of the quiet mail carrier who had, with his steady presence and small kindnesses, slowly and patiently drawn me out of my shell. It hadn't been a dramatic, sweeping romance. It had been a slow burn, a gradual accumulation of small moments, of shared smiles and lingering touches that had built a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of all my fears. Elias shifted beside me, his thumb stroking my arm. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into my hair. I smiled, a deep, contented feeling spreading through my chest. I tilted my head back to look at him, at his kind eyes and the soft curve of his mouth. "Nothing," I said. "Everything." I was no longer just watching my life through a window. I was living it, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever painted. I had spent years feeling lost, and now, curled up against the steady heart of a man who delivered the mail, I finally felt like I'd come home.